Hello, welcome to Métis Spirit Art. I hope you enjoy the lesson. Today we're going to learn how to paint a landscape. We're going to start with the materials that you need. You're going to need some white acrylic paint, two shades of blue, green acrylic paint, orange, yellow, brown, and we'll be mixing the white to make some lighter tones of color. Our theme today is a landscape scene that includes birch trees, sunset, the hills, the water, the land. Is very important to Indigenous people. Land is life to all living things. Of course, the paper is Canson paper. It's a mixed media paper. When you're painting on paper, make sure that it's the right kind of paper. It has to be thick enough to hold the paint so that it won't curl. There might be some curling regardless, but you can always flatten it underneath something. But this is the best kind of paper to use. So you'll need a couple different kinds of brushes. You'll need a flat paintbrush. You'll need a size 4 paintbrush. You will need some paper towel. You will need some water to clean your brushes off. You're probably going to need a paper plate or container to mix your paints in. And yeah, that's about it for the materials you'll need. Let's get started. All right, I'm going to start with the darkest blue color. You can mix your colors with a little bit of water so they're not so thick if you'd like. I had done that with mine. And what I'm going to do is paint across the top part of the paper a nice couple strokes of blue. May have to thin that out depending on what kind of paint, and it'll spread it out, like add some water to your brush. You'll get a feel for it. If you feel you need to add some water to your brush, go ahead and do that. And what I'm going to do next is get a lighter color of blue. I thought that an aqua color blue would be wonderful, so I'm just going to squirt some of that out onto my container over here. And what I'm going to do now is probably add a little water to my brush just to make the paint a little thinner. And I'm going to put it right up next to that color. And I am going to blend it. Some people blend like this. They do little crisscrosses over and over. It really does depend on the opacity of your paint. Paints are of different qualities and thicknesses, and it depends on how much pigment's in with them. This particular one, I'm going to add a little bit of the previous color to it to try and blend it a little more, and just blend it down into the next color blue to make a nice beautiful sky. And then just continue on with that same color. And the next blue, I had mentioned that in the tutorial steps that you could use 3 blues. You don't have to, but it's nice to get an effect with 3 different blues. So now what I'm going to do is take this blue, the same blue I started with, and I'm going to add some white into, you can't see my pan right now. I'm just going to add some white so that that color blue has really toned down. So the lightest blue will be at the bottom of the skyline. So here we go. Here is how that looks. A little bit different tone than the rest of them. You notice that I'm working quite quickly. You don't have to. I've been painting for a while now, so I'm quite comfortable with working quicker. Again, add some more water to blend the sky together. Keep blending. I'm going to take some of the aqua blue and try and blend those two together. And a little bit more of the, you notice I had picked up a color that's a little bit too dark, but that's okay. It all adds to the look of the painting. So there is my skyline. Now in the painting I had mentioned that we do, or in the steps I mentioned that the next thing we do is add some hills. Now we can do that. So if you want, you can allow this to dry. It's good to allow things to dry as well so that the colors don't run into one another. Really depends how runny your paint is. So we're going to do some hills, just like the Qu'Appelle Hills here in Saskatchewan. That's where my family grew up. My mom's side, and my Kokum, that's where her home was, in the Qu'Appelle Valley. I remember rolling down those hills as a child. I absolutely loved it. So right now I'm just kind of making an outline, a thin outline. You'll notice that it's taking on some of the blue paint, but as the paint dries, that will all be covered up. I had mentioned that I wanted you to make a lake below. Now, the lake below mine represents, in the Qu'Appelle Valley, Lake Mission and Katepwa, where my Kokum's home was on the road allowance. She was actually between two lakes. So that's why I wanted to do it that way. I wanted it to represent that. So you might want to mix up another blue. You don't have to make this one too thick. This will be the lake. Make sure that it's a little bit darker again, because we're going to make lighter waves with another color. So now we're going to need some green for the foreground. So the green, do you notice how my paper's not really curling? That's because it's a thicker kind of a paper. So the green is going to be the grassy area of the scene. You could say the plains area. So there's a nice grassy area. You can paint in some grass strands at the end if you want. Just have fun with it. And there's no need to go as quickly as I am. I mean, this is a fun, relaxing tutorial. I'm just going to add a little bit of white in there, and the green. And how I do that, I can use a different, I want to make sure that it blends in nice. So it can't just be a stripe of white. So how do I do that? Any little different colors will add depth. Just go back in there, and you don't want to get too much white on your brush. White can be a very overpowering color. Really tones down the colors. If you find that there's a spot that maybe looks like it has too much white, go back in there and Tone it down a little bit. Okay, so that added a little bit of depth. Now, if you want, you can then add some blades of grass. We're just going to let this dry for a minute, and I'll be right back. Okay, let's paint the sun now. It didn't take too long for it to be dry enough to paint the sun. I'm only going to make a sun that's peeking out over top of the hills. If you want, you can make a full circle sun, but for today's lesson, I'm only going to do half. So what I'm going to do is I'll do it freehand. I'll try and figure out where the center is. So it's kind of right here. So you'll want to, if you want, you can even use a half circle if you want to sketch in a sun. I'm just doing mine freehand today. So what we'll do is just paint that half circle shape or quarter circle shape. You'll figure it out as you go along. When it feels good, you'll use that shape for your sun. Now I'm using a size 4 brush. You don't want to use a big thick brush when you're painting in smaller objects or details. It just won't work. So you'll get a feel for the circle when it looks better, when it looks the way you want. Then you can stop. Now I went a little bit over the hills here. That can be fixed up. Like I said, once your paint is dry, you can fix it up. Okay, so I just wanted to paint the top part of the sun because I'm going to paint in another layer with a different color at the bottom. But for now, probably orange. I am going to make the squiggly sun rays. So here we go. You don't want to press too hard when you're doing this. You press lightly. So for instance, we could just go like that and then go out, make another one in the center, and then do another one off to the side around the same distance as you did the opposite ones. And then you'll want to make some short rays like that, a few short ones, and just kind of wisp it upward so that it has a point on the paint. Now as you see, they're quite blunt at the ends. A really neat thing to do is circle off the corners. So make a half kind of circle where you see the corners and join like that. It just gives a little nicer effect. So that's what I'm doing right now. Rounding off the corners of where the sun rays meet the circle part of the sun. So that's done now. I'm going to clean off my brush. You can let that dry if you feel comfortable. If you put enough paint onto your brush, sometimes you can just go ahead and paint. Maybe you want it to blend in more with the yellow, and that's fine too. So we'll go like this. If the bottom color is completely dry and it's acrylic, it's not going to smudge. Not like if it was a watered base paint, it would. Like watercolor, you would not be able to do this so quickly. So I'm just going to try and follow along with the hill like this. Paint that in like that. the type of paint I'm using is golden, and golden is quite a pricey paint. You don't have to buy golden. Liquitex Basics is a good place to start with your art, you don't for practicing and whatnot, but I had a lot of this paint around, so I thought I'd just do the tutorial with this. Now at the bottom part of this, I'm going to add a little more yellow right in there, but I will let that dry for a little bit. That orange is quite wet. Now, when I had mentioned earlier, I was going to mix up the same brown with a little bit of white. So we're going to stylize the hills a little more. So how do I stylize the hills? Well, you try and figure out where the hill would meet, first of all, where a hill would meet the water. And you go up. With this technique, you want your paint to be quite wet and pull it through like that. Okay, and then continue on. You want to leave a little bit of the darker color. Like that. And then it's basically working your way in layers like this until you get to the middle. So there you go. I rinsed my brush off. I got all the cakey, I took off the previous color. Well, it's wet enough. And then I'm going to rinse it again because I'm trying to get some really nice straight lines here. Oh, a little bit too much water. Make sure that you don't put too much water on that or you're going to run into troubles. And this is exactly what I mean by that. So we'll just go like that. And there. Okay. Oops. I wanted to add a little more yellow paint in here. Now, I didn't expect to do that, but that's okay. So sometimes these things happen. You just go with it. Don't let it affect your flow. Okay. There we go. Adds a little depth in there. You stylize your sun whatever way you want. When if you do a full rounded sun, you can use this style too, like the hills. Looks actually quite beautiful. Just remember to round off the corners. When you round off the corners, it really produces a wonderful effect of the rays. Okay. I think I'm good. So we'll just leave that for now. Now, I would like to let this dry for a little bit. And then we're going to come in and we're going to paint on some birch trees. Hi, so now that it's dry, it'll be a little bit easier to paint the trunks of the trees on. So we're going to paint some birch trees, and it's going to be in 2 steps. So we'll have to have one more drying time. So we'll make the birch, we'll start with making a couple of outlines. And the birch trees, of course, are going to be on the sides of the pictures. We don't want to go over the sun area. So I'm just going to make 2 for now on each side. Try and make it kind of an even distance from the sun. Now these are just guides for now. We'll make the tree trunks a little bit wider. So I'm going to go back in there. I picked up some more paint, of course. So the trees are in the foreground. Now you can use black or really deep brown that's darker than the hills, because you want something that's quite contrasting. So I just go in. You can actually sketch these in before you start if you are not comfortable in just freehanding the paint. That is fine. I have no problem, whatever you're comfortable with. Now, we know that birch trees are not dark brown or black, but this is the first layer of paint. So often when you're painting, you paint in layers. So we'll try and make the tree trunks kind of the same thickness on each side, just to give it a little bit of equal value on each side. Okay, so there's that. Now I am going to, I know they don't have any branches yet, so that's what we're going to do now. So of course you're going to have to use smaller brush. I'll start with this one on the inside. I got some paint on my arm, that's okay. That happens. I'm going to go like this. Now when you're making your branches, you might want to make them a little thicker than that. Go up. Branches aren't like, you have to kind of round the corners again. Rounding the corners really adds to the look. Round it and then bring that up. If it doesn't look good, you can always go over it. Like here, I noticed that the trunk might be going in a little bit there, so I want to make it more uniform. So I can go over it with my brush again. And I missed. Okay, now that it's all dry, we can use a few different tools to paint the birch trees, the white portion of the birch trees, the bark. So these are some of the tools. You can use a palette knife. You can use something that's straight edged. You might want to break it so it's shorter. It might be easier to use. I think you probably could use popsicle stick. And also you can use a brush that has a straight edge here, so that when you're painting, you can just paint across. I'll leave it up to you. For today's purposes, I'm going to use a palette knife. So just to show you that when you are dipping into the paint, you want to take only one side, maybe make a long one side like this. You don't want to put too much on. Just dip it in, and then I think maybe starting at the top would be, the paper's a little bit folded or curled because of the wetness of the paint. Then all you want to do is scrape it across like this, and you'll notice that, then you can dip the other side of it. You'll notice that it makes some nice designs in it, like a birch tree would have. So if you make a little mistake like that, don't worry. Try and go right on the edge of the trunk and then push down and move across this way a bit. Be careful that you don't go too far, because you don't want to go on to the sky area on the opposite side of the tree. So just be careful when you're doing that. So with my pellet knife, I'm pressing down and pushing sideways. You could also do this with a brush, whatever would be easier for you, and depending on your skill level and your comfort. There are some touch-ups we'll do at the end of the painting, so don't worry if you make a few mistakes. Like I said, when you're painting with acrylics, it's very forgivable. So you can see that some natural designs that a birch tree would have in nature just kind of are created with this process. You might not want that many dark spots within it. I think I have a few less, but there's some really nice ones I see in here. So I'm going to do the next one on this side. Same thing. Just dab your paint. You're dabbing quite often, you'll notice, and then find the edge of the trunk and press down and move over, and then do the opposite side. Same thing. So these are making some nice little birch trees. You might want to go in with that darker. You're going to go over top of these again too, because we don't want too many dark areas showing. Now, the same as last time. Just gonna go in here and just put a little thin line. You don't have to make it too thick, because then it'll be very noticeable. And how you make a thinner line, make sure that the paint on your brush is not dried or caked on. Clean it up, dip off all the water so it's not too runny. Dip into your paint and just make that nice straight line. It's much easier. You could probably get away with doing that about 3 times, and then you'll have to clean your brush off again because this paint dries quite quickly. This, I made a little bit of a mistake there, so I'll make the trunk just a bit thicker. Put a little bit of a notch in there. Same on this side. Go over on this side. Now you can see why it's much easier to make sure that the background is painted. Now I do see a couple of areas that I can touch up. I'm going to start with the sun. I'm going to start with the yellow part of the sun, and then I'm going to go to the orange part of the sun. Whoops. So just make sure that brush is clean. You can make your nature scenery yours. Okay? The way you want it. So anything goes. The way you do it, that's the way it is. Okay, so I'm just almost thinking that I could even add maybe a few little extra details in here. My paint's pretty full of paint though. I'm worried that it might be too much. I'm going very, very lightly. Very, very, very lightly. I don't want them thicker than the actual first rays, the yellow rays that I made first. I want them thinner. And I'm just pressing very, very lightly. There we go. That gives it a little more contrast.
And that's the end of our tutorial on how to paint birch bark trees and a landscape. Just remember that land is life and let's look after it. Thank you. Bye-bye. Marcy.